Hello, boils and ghouls. It's your old pal, John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper. And I want to thank you for listening to Delight and Fright with your hosts, Luna and Cat, a podcast for outcasts.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, good evening, and welcome to Delight in Fright. I'm Kat, and you're a lovely host, Luna. We have a special guest with us today. We have Anthony M Caro. He is the author of Universal Monsters and Neurotics, Children of the Night and Their Hangups. He is also author as Why is Cal Drawing Stick Figures at 3 a.m. in the 22nd Century? And what we'll be discussing mostly today is Tragedy Man, a horror anthology. So I'm excited to find out all these interesting tidbits about you, Anthony.
Well,
Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, Anthony, how's your day going? How's everything been for you today?
It's been a typical Monday, I get up early, I start doing some work, and then I scoot out. I taught a little jujitsu, and then came back, did a little bit more work, and prep for the interview. Yeah.
Nice.
Busy day, busy week, busy month, busy year.
Yeah, I can't believe it's already halfway done through November, and feels like I barely took a breath in November, and I'm like, oh, we're almost done.
Here we go.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I wanted to discuss a little bit. Some of your work is so fascinating to me. You write such eloquent stuff. How did you get into writing?
Well, I think that, you're always going to, no matter who you are, you're going to write at school. And just like you take a gym class, if you put a kid in front of home plate, put a bat in his hand, and he's just knocking the ball out every time he swings. This kid's probably going to keep playing, baseball. And in other words, if you have a latent talent or you have an ability with something, and it's not perfect, but it's good and it has potential, and you're going to like doing it. And when it came to writing, in school, when I mean in school, I'm going back like the fourth grade. Um, I like to write. I didn't like multiple choice tests. I didn't like true or false tests. I thought they were dumb. I liked essays, and I liked essay tests where they'd ask you a question, you write 2-3 paragraphs answers, and it was something I thought I had I want to use the word latent because it wasn't that great at the beginning. It took a lot of work, a lot of refinement, and also I was an avid reader from day one. Starting with comic books. And again, when I say day one, I'm talking like 5, 6 years old. Reading comic books at the barber shop because they used to have a big stack of them, and I used to go through them. And as I got older, your reading tastes mature, and you start reading novels and you start reading nonfiction, and it just becomes a daily routine and a daily habit. So if you're an avid reader and you like writing, you're going to read a lot, and you're going to write a lot. They're going to play off each other.
Nice. I completely agree, Anthony. When I was in school, I would take an essay any day over multiple choice because for me, multiple choice, you had to get it right or that was it. At least with an essay, you could maybe circle around about it a little bit and get close, and they'd be like, fair enough, right?
Well, if you write a paragraph response, can't say you don't know it unless the response isn't a good one. But you could sit there and just do this on a true and false test, and if you do it enough, you can pass it. So I never consider those type of tests reflective of knowledge. That's all memorization. You don't want that.
Yeah. It for sure gives you a different perspective too. And you write based on what you're reading. So like let's say you're reading a lot of like Edgar Allan Poe, right? You're going to develop some writing techniques that he might have used. Or if you're reading things like Tolkien, where it's like so detailed, you might start to become a lot more elaborated in the way you write things into the story. So it just kind of depends on who inspired you growing up. Who would you say inspired you, Anthony, to write the way you do?
Well, I always point to Philip K. Dick as one of my favorite writers, but I don't write uh, his style. Same with Harlan Ellison. I really love Harlan Ellison, but our style is a lot different. But you know, Philip K. Dick was, they call him like the father of cyberpunk, which really isn't entirely accurate. I kind of would say maybe William Gibson would be more the father of it. Although PKD did set the course for that, with Blade Runner, or the book that Blade Runner was based on. But also, when I was kind of maturing, kind of outside of kids oriented reading, as I got a little older, as I got to be a teenager, I this was at the tail end of the paperback from hell era, where the glory days of the 70s all the way into the early 80s, the pulp massive flooding of the horror shelves with these low priced pot boilers that would sell insane amounts of copies. Like Jack Ketchum's Off Season, I think, did 200 or 300,000 copies. Um, and as the pulps were dying, the high concept was rising, and that's where you started getting more Stephen King, more Dean Koontz. And I remember reading Dean Koontz's Phantoms, which I thought was really fantastic. And I remember reading Christine and noticing a very big difference between the style of writing there versus the style of writing, in, say, not to put Charles L. Grant down, but Charles L. Grant was a pulp writer, and he did a lot of 195-page books that, would be more pulpy, PG rated stuff that was kind of. He always used to have a classic monster on the cover, so they were kind of homages to old monsters with more for like a general audience, a general ages audience. And not to say that everything from that era was like that. There was a lot of really sleazy stuff that came out at that time, but that's what helped sell those cheap books. And then there was kind of a shift from the pulp stuff to the high concept stuff, because everybody wanted one author who could sell 1 million copies versus 10 authors who are selling 75, 80,000, 100,000 copies. They wanted one guy or one woman to come up and just swoop through and sell 1 million, 2 million copies and get all these movie rights and all TV rights and all that stuff. So I was kind of at the tail end, not to say it completely disappeared, but at the end of the glory days of the paperback from hell pulp era. And that stuff kind of, it's kind of in the back of the brain. So a lot of the stuff I write, I think, would have found a home back in 1981 or something like that. But I tried to make it a little bit more for the current audience. I'm not, like, for an indie author writing for horror fans who want to read indie authors' work, they probably would want something that is a little bit more, for lack of a better word, thought-provoking, something that's a little different, maybe not entirely mainstream accessible, but I'm not writing for mainstream. I'm writing for horror fans, and trying to tap into the things that they like or they like to read, or things they want to read that, maybe it's not out there, like Gene Simmons of Kiss, like he said that, when he developed the band, he just was always motivated by trying to make something that he wanted to see that wasn't out there that he could see. So he wanted to make a band that catered to what both himself and what other fans wanted, basically something new, something different that would appeal to them. So I kind of let that guide me. So those old books were pretty much what motivated me to read in the early days. Later on, I kind of got more into short stories, and I started becoming a huge nonfiction writer. And I think for a long period of time, other than revisiting comic books, I spent most of my reading time reading uh, magazines, film criticism, film theory, history, biographies, and things of that nature, and spending a little bit less time with reading fiction. And then in this past couple years, 3, 4 years, I started going back and reading fiction. And I do want to give two people a plug: John Skip and Craig Spector. A book that was really, really, really blew me away back in the day was The Light at the End, which was about, and I
Yes.
haven't read it in many years, but it was about a vampire living in the subway, like down and out, and really, like, you just didn't have vampire books like that at that time. I mean, it was just it was a dude was a sad sack who just becomes a vampire. This guy doesn't have two nickels to rub together, and he's trying to figure his way out of this mess. So
Nice.
that was a classic.
I absolutely. Are we losing you? No, Anthony. No, come back.
The moment he started talking about the vampires got him.
They sucked him out. But those speaking of those are very near and dear to my heart as well. I have an entire bookshelf of just paperbacks from hell because I love them so much. And the one that he mentioned just really got me into it because
Hey,
it's
did I lose
super
you?
dark. Yeah, you got snatched by the vampires.
Yeah.
No, that was
Don't
somebody.
summon them. Did you invite him? Did you invite him in? Is that why they came over?
No, don't do it.
No, don't do it.
No.
Don't let him back in.
Told these dudes, I'm on them. Don't call me.
I was just saying, Anthony, while you disappeared for a little bit, that Skip and Spectre were two of my favorite authors. Like I hunted down their books. I still have them. I have an entire bookshelf just dedicated to paperbacks from hell. That's how much I
wow.
love that genre, that type of book where it's like it gets really dark and you're like, are they going to go there? Oh, they do.
Oh, they go there and worse.
Yes,
If you want to read one of the crazier one, not the best written book, but a very disturbing book would be Let's Go Play at the Adams. I mean, that was, oh my God, that was just resurrected, and came out in '75, and it's been republished for the first time in 40 odd years, or 50 years it's
nice.
been out of print, and wow, it still packs a punch. Yeah, yeah. It was different though. See, reading today, you know not if you weren't there, and when the stuff was coming out originally, it was pretty shocking. Today, when you look back at it through the lens, at least you get a warning, because you can read all these reviews or all these books or all these references. You know what you're getting. But in those days, you just had those really cool artist rendition covers, and it grabbed you, and you bought it. You paid your $2.95, and you'd read it and be like, "Oh my God, this stuff's out there."
I'd be reading it at home as like a preteen, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe they're letting me read this. And Mom would be,
Yeah.
come watch TV with the family. I'm like, no, this is far better.
I can't say they were edgier back then, because extreme horror is really popular now, but in those days, I think there was more editorial control, and I think they weren't self-published. They were put out by major publishing companies. So you had an editor and a publisher looking over your shoulder, and I think they were, I wouldn't say restrained, but they kind of knew how to balance, their craziness with with a good story that could grab 100, 200,000 readers off of the market that was ravenous for it. But people people don't need those books as much today, because they have cell phones. Like, you don't need to read that. You don't need to flip through a paperback on the subway anymore. Now you got your cell phone. You can. So that actually put a crimp. Um, I put a crimp in the paperback market and the magazine market and all that. It is a shame. It's a lost era, but it's still fun to look back on.
Yeah, I grew up right when we still had books and paperbacks, and that was like the heyday. I remember reading Goosebumps. That was like the
Oh wow.
most extreme thing I was allowed to read
Mhm.
as a kid. And I
Mhm.
remember there was one Goosebump book where I don't remember exactly what happened, but there was like this like possessed like puppet thing. I don't know.
Mhm.
The puppeteer. I don't know. It was weird. And ever since then, ventriloquists or anybody that do like the puppet voice stuff, I'm just like,
Yeah.
nope.
Yeah.
Ventriloquists
Yeah.
freak me out.
I didn't. I never saw the movie, but I think it was the original anthology, Dead of Night. I think that might have been the first one to start to real. Well, I wouldn't say the first one, but I think that might have been the first mainstream horror movie that played to that ventriloquist theme. I think there was a story with a ventriloquist dummy in that. That might be where that's an homage to. But of course, they were Dead of Night came out in the 1940s, and there were there were
Yeah.
tons of other ones.
Yeah, all the I don't know what it is, but those wooden, like, ventriloquist dummies, I don't know, but they are freaky as fuck, and then they
Yeah,
make them
they're
like
creepy.
they give them those glass-looking eyes and that freaking red mouth, and they're just like, "Gonna eat your
when
soul."
when you're a really good ventriloquist, you can really get suspension of disbelief, and you begin to believe that you begin to forget that that's somebody throwing their voice. And when the person's telling jokes, that's fine, but when they're making their doll creepy, then it gets really it gets really freaky because you know
Yeah.
you think that this little thing is real, and they're just, oh man, yeah, they are creepy when they want to be.
Yeah.
They can be funny, but they can be creepy too.
Yeah. There's only one ventriloquist that I'm okay with, and I think is it I'm gonna butcher his name. I think is it Jeff Dunham? Where he has the jalapeno on a stick and
Oh yeah. I can't remember. Yeah, I think it's Jeff. Yeah. That's fun stuff. Yeah.
I think he's the only one that I'm kind of okay with because it's like he's they're not threatening. It's like a little jalapeno or it's like little, you know, not
Yeah. Yeah.
traditional ventriloquist puppets, dummies,
They're just
whatever they're
having
called.
fun.
Exactly. That I'm okay with, but the traditional looking, no.
Yeah,
Get
yeah,
it
yeah,
away
yeah,
from
yeah,
me.
yeah. Yeah, they were a little. They just, yeah, they were creepy.
For sure.
So, Anthony, I saw you had wrote an article about the early Man Thing. I didn't know that Man Thing sold more than Swamp Thing. I'm a huge Swamp Thing fan, so I was wondering if maybe you could tell us a little more about your love of Man Thing and what do you think draws us to creatures such as that?
Well, it's a popular character that, first of all, Theodore Sturgeon was probably the first person to write a pop culture or introduce, maybe not even introduce, but he wrote a short story called It, and it was about a swamp monster, and that would influence a lot of other uh, writers. Theodore Sturgeon didn't create swamp creatures. They had been around for forever. They're mythical. Myths, folklore like Bigfoot or what the dog man in Michigan, all that. Every little territory area had its own little myths. Some of them nobody remembers, like Owlman. Owlman was I think a British half man, half owl thing that was whatever during the
I remember
70s.
Owlman because I
Yeah,
like owls.
yeah. But yeah. What happened was in the 50s, or I think it was the 50s, there was a character called the Heap, which was a swamp creature that I think was pretty popular. I don't really remember that much about the Heap, but swamp monsters would pop up here and there in comic books, and I believe it was it. Oh boy, it was a DC Comics short. It was an anthology, and I want to say. Uh, House of Secrets. That's what it was. It was House of Secrets, and they did a short story called Swamp Thing, set in the Victorian era. about a fellow who becomes a swamp monster and gets revenge for deeds that were done wrong to him. And he was on the cover. Bernie Wright's, I think it was a Bernie Wrightson cover, and it was a massive seller. It just sold and sold and sold. So they said, let's do a series off of this, which was Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson's Swamp Thing, the first 10 or 12 issues. And I wrote about Swamp Thing too. I wrote for Horror News on that. Swamp Thing, I think, was canceled after a dozen or so issues. Great series, but the original run was canceled. And about the same time Swamp Thing came out, this would be 1971, 1972. Around 1973, 74, Marvel went and said, well, we'll do our own version of the Man Thing, or a swamp creature. We'll call it the Man Thing. And he debuted, I think he debuted in Fear magazine, which was an anthology, and then I think he was in Fate, which was another magazine, and then he got his own series. No, maybe I think he was in Marvel Spotlight or something like that. I can't remember. But then he got his own series. It's a great series. Didn't last long. Canceled very quickly. And Man Thing came back in 1980, and it was a great series. Lasted about 7 or 8 issues, 11 issues, and canceled. The character didn't sell. Doesn't mean the books weren't great. They just didn't sell. And when I was a little kid, you had a company called Power Records. Power Records was a division of Peter Pan out of Newark, New Jersey. They did children's LPs and 45 RPMs. And they had a licensing deal back in the days when you could get a licensing deal very easy with DC Comics or Marvel. And they would do audio dramatizations of the comic books, and they would release them as book and records. Because you got to remember, this is before computers, this is before cell phones and all that. And you had your little 45 RPM, and you read along with the book, and it would make a beeping sound where you had to change the page. And they released several of the Marvel horror books. They did Frankenstein, Werewolf by Night, Tomb of Dracula, Man Thing. And they were re-edited. They would take like 2 or 3 issues and re-edit them. And for Man Thing, they did a series, a 2-parter. We really re-edited it, called Night of the Laughing Dead, which is about a depressed clown who puts a gun to his head and shoots himself in the head, and then his ghost is wandering around trying to get revenge on the circus strongman and the people who did him wrong. And what blew my mind was this was about as inappropriate as you could get for a children's book record as you could get. I mean, I don't know what was going. I mean, there's so many different Man Thing books that would have been like Captain Fate, who was the ghost pirate. I mean, I could see them doing, having him, with the swashbuckling ghost pirates and Man Thing, throwing them all over the place. But my God, when they chose that story, I mean, it was really, really over the top and really, really, I mean, it's a good story, but damn, that was not for kids. And it kind of stuck with me. So I kind of stayed a Man Thing fan, like revisiting it and purchasing the collected editions and reading it, years later. And it's a great series, but the series, as it was written for an older audience. It was not for kids. It was never marketed to kids. And I shouldn't say that. He did guest appearance. Like in my essay, it talks about the guest appearances in the superhero books,
Nice.
which didn't do anything. They didn't spike sales. Largely because, again, he's appearing in books that are written for 11-year-olds, and then his book is written for a 17, 18-year-old. But it was a cool character, but he's not exactly a top tier character, but they kind of resurrected him for a cameo. I mean, he had a movie a while back nobody watched, but they resurrected him for a cameo in Werewolf by Night. And I said to myself, I think they're going to do a Halloween special with Man Thing sooner or later, because they wouldn't be debuting if they weren't going to bring him back.
Right.
So that kind of but when I went to write the article for comic book historians, comicbookhistorians.com, you can read a bunch of my essays and a bunch by Alex Grand and other contributors. When I went back to write about the character, I didn't know that they had hyped him in all these superhero books at the time. And I went back and I read them, and it was cool, but you could really see why the books never lasted because Man Thing, he doesn't speak, he doesn't make any sound. He just, he's got the gimmick where if you're scared of him and he touches you, you burn. And what can you, it's an anthology basically. He's kind of in the background in his own book. And putting him in with like Shang-Chi and putting him in with Spider-Man and putting him in with Daredevil, yeah, it was cool. I mean, I guess it gave him exposure, but the character just he was he, it. You can't have a lead character who's not a lead character. Your lead character is in the background, and that's probably why it doesn't work. You can write really great stories. You can do really good stuff. You can do interesting things, but at the end of the day, it's Man Thing, and if he's not the focus or he's not the central focus of your story, readers are going to be disappointed because who they want to see is off the page for sometimes just too long. And but that's not to say the stories weren't bad. It just was he was just a tough. Some of these characters work fine as guest stars. They work fine in miniseries, but to sustain every month, it's a challenge because you don't have a lot to work with. Swamp Thing is different. Swamp Thing was a far more developed character, and they kept developing him, and that's kind of why that character's been a lot more successful. So,
But
yeah,
they're both very dark characters, and I love that you're
yeah.
seeing that as a kid and like, yeah, Man Thing's the man for me, like so dark. I love it. I love it. I think it's that they're very antisocial. You know what I mean? I think that's why they don't really work as the main character.
Yeah, it was just especially the original versions in the 70s. Yeah, they were extremely dark, very atypical for.
Oh no, we lost you.
I can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
Can't hear you. Oh. I'm not muted.
No.
Here, let me tell him.
Am I back?
Oh yeah, you're back.
Okay. Yeah.
Those vampires keep possessing you.
Yeah. What happened was the comics code kind of put out a lot of pressure on after the fallout from EC Comics and the censorship of horror comics. You were not really allowed to have monsters or really prominently. I mean, DC had them with the anthologies and all that, but a lot of their horror stuff even kind of veered into sci-fi. And when Marvel finally, in the early 70s, the restrictions were lifted and you could bring back vampires, werewolves, and all those fun things. What had happened was they weren't selling, because you're doing a Frankenstein series, you're doing a Dracula series, and The Exorcist is playing in theaters, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and all that. So kind of by the time you could do classic monsters in comics, they were past their prime, so to speak. They were past their marketing potential. So and you couldn't do anything really graphic and Marvel wouldn't do it, and DC wouldn't do it. You know, but still, I remember the House of Mystery and the DC books going well into the 80s. So they were fun to read, and they were pretty cool. Juvenile in some ways, but still pretty cool. But even then, they kind of by 1983, I think horror comics were pretty much finito for a while. It just like they went in cycles.
Yeah, that's for sure. Going into your biggest thing, or I should say, yeah, I would say it's the biggest thing, right? Tragedy Men. Would you say that's like the biggest project you've had up to date?
Yes. That's my my the other books were much smaller in page length, although, the Universal Monsters book was a nonfiction book. Tragedy Man was something I worked on for about a year and a half. It was written originally in serialized form, and I re-edited it to put it out in paperback. And it is an anthology, but it is not a short story collection. It's not like Books of Blood or something where you can skip from story 1 to story 5, go to story 3. I wrote it as I probably mispronounced this, portmanteau version of an anthology, where you have the stories, but they're connected by a framework, and you kind of have to follow them in order. And with Tragedy Man, the framework was basically, it's set in the early 1970s during the heyday of the paperbacks from hell era, and it takes place in New Jersey, in the shadow of New York, Times Square, Long Island, and Manhattan and whatnot. And you have a rundown theater in New Jersey that has seen far better days. And there is an advertisement for improv performances because the whomever is running this decrepit theater wants to do live improv on Tuesday nights, and it attracts 5, I don't want to say out of work actors. You have people who either never got a break, had a break, blew it, were successful, fell from grace, or were successful, but not in the way they wanted to be. So you have these diverse collection of 5 characters in the theater, and they go on stage to do their improv. And the hook is they have to do tragedies. So what you get is you basically get a horror story. Well, you get 4 horror stories and 1 crime story. Story 4 is a crime story. I gotta, gotta get that across. And they present themselves in a fictitious, fantasy-driven tragedy that mirrors basically their real life screw-ups. And if you've ever spent any time in Hollywood or in the theater or in the entertainment industry, you're going to meet a lot of people who've had their, a lot of ups and downs and a lot of self-inflicted wounds, so to speak, in terms of why they don't succeed or do it as much as they want to do. So that was my take on it, because I'm from Philadelphia, and I wanted to recapture. Well, I was a fan of the old. I like anthologies. I don't like anthologies that don't have a framework. Like Cat's Eye, Nightmares. They're not bad films, but it's like watching one short film after the other. So you can watch one short, wait 6 months, watch the second story, wait 2 years, watch the third story, and what's the difference between doing that and watching all 5 of them in a row? But when you watch something like, say, an Amicus film, like like House that Dripped Blood, you have a framework that connects them, and that framework turns the anthology into a single movie. So you have 4 or 5 different stories, but the framework connects it, and that keeps a consistent theme, so that you feel that you're watching a film or you're reading a novel, as opposed to something you can pick up, put down, pick up, put down, pick up, put down. And that has a different psychology on the reader, because they're reading the short stories to find out what happens in the framework. So they read it as if they're reading a novel, because it is a novel. The framework turns it into that. And with it, it's very East Coast. It's very, very, very. It's set in the 70s, and I captured a lot of it. I mean, myself, I was very young in the 70s, but growing up in the 80s, a lot of 1970s movies and TV shows. So I quite familiar with the early 70s, like what went on. And then, of course, I have strong recollections of the late 1970s. And what I mean by that is I don't mean just some dude, wearing a funny hat or wearing bell bottoms or whatever. I mean really just the way people were in the 1970s. And what I mean by people, I'm talking New Jersey, New York, Philadelphia, that very East Coast. And that was my kind of haha with Amicus, because Amicus were very, very British. I mean, they're it was a British film company, and they used British talent. Um, so you had a British writing style, you had a British acting style. Even though they were extremely successful in the United States, you would never confuse this for something that wasn't made in the UK. So when I did Tragedy Man, I really, really put it in North Jersey, New York, uh, in the down and out element. When I talk about decrepit, rundown theaters, I spent an enormous amount of time, probably too much time, in my teenage years visiting second run theaters. Um, Second run theaters, for those who don't remember them, or probably weren't born when they were around. A second run
I
theater was
remember.
yeah, it's like right now you got the Marvels. Marvels just came out. Well, what happened was if you didn't want to spend full price for a ticket, you wait 7, 8, 9 months, and it would show up in a rundown second run theater for $2. And these theaters
The
also
floors were
carry,
sticky.
yeah, oh, the ceilings were the
And
ceilings.
sometimes the film would set on fire in front of your eyes, like, oh no, not again.
I did not never saw it catch fire, but I did see it go out of focus. And it was a 3D movie. I can't remember the name of the 3D movie. And I spoke about this on another podcast before. It's we were in a beat up theater, very early 80s, very young, and movie went out of focus. And again, this is Philadelphia, and it's not exactly known for congeniality. And when the movie was going out of focus, people would turn around and they would look at the projectionist and they would start yelling at the projectionist. I'm not going to repeat what they said, but they would scream at the projectionist to focus the film. And before you know it, the projectionist starts yelling back at them like, well, if you know how to do it, you can come up here and do it yourself, or something to that effect. And while people started getting up from their chair, and ushers came out, and people were getting face to face and yelling and screaming. And man, I booked out of that theater because it started to get a little hairy. And the only good thing about it was there's only about a dozen or so people, 15 people in the theater. But in a situation like that, if you had a packed theater with 100 people, 200 people, you could have a bad situation if an argument or a fight broke out and people were you didn't want that in a crowded theater. But that would happen in some of those theaters. I mean, I won't say that a lot of things happen in the theater, but outside the theater, you would see arguments carry outside, where you'd see people confront people at their car. Like something would happen in the theater, and then you'd be in a parking lot, and a guy would get in your face in a parking lot, and then you'd actually see, fist fights and craziness. And yeah, that was the thing. That see those theaters also played a lot of movies that were not. They weren't second run. They were first run, and they would play for a week. Like you would get a lot of Canon movies, you get a lot of Empire Pictures movies, and you would get some really weird week to week bookings. Like you could have like that. You would have like a no one under 17 admitted movie like Pieces, and then the next week they would have like Sesame Street's Follow That Bird. And then the next week you have Charles Bronson movies. Then the next week will be E.T. I mean, you would sit there and you just never knew what was going to fly into town with some of these theaters. And then, at one time they were really nice theaters, but as the video boom exploded and the drive-ins were dying, people stopped going to these theaters, but they still had they could still make a few bucks, they could still hang on. Um, maybe they played in mostly empty houses, but then you get Friday the 13th Part 5 and the place would be packed for a week, and or they would get a deal on Rocky 3, and they hold Rocky 3 over for 2 weeks to packed houses. So they would just they would get enough money to stay in business, and then there would be the empty houses where they're playing like Charles Bronson's Murphy's Law, which is a great movie, but it wasn't exactly gonna, wasn't exactly gonna, weren't exactly gonna have standing room only crowds. So a lot of that carried over into Tragedy Man, because that's kind of the setting with the framework. As for the characters, they're different. You have Hustler. You have one character is a hustler who's trying to look for a big break without ever having to work a day job, and then you have two characters who were very successful, but they're in their later years are very unsatisfied, and that kind of drives them to go back to the bottom to try to scrape away at something a little better. And then you have characters who kind of were adrift. It's kind of they're not succeeding, but they just keep doing it year to year because that's all they know. And I thought that moved it out of your standard horror book to a transgressive kind of approach. And I gotta be careful talking about transgressive fiction, because that's where it comes off a little pretentious. But transgressive fiction is not pretentious. It's just it's not it could be satirical, or it could, well, transgressive would be more deconstructive, like Fight Club, Invisible Monsters, Less Than Zero, Notes from the Underground. Those are all transgressive works, which are basically, they're about characters or people or whomever that are on the edge of society, and they kind of can't fit in. They try to fit in, but they don't fit in, so they're kind of in and out on the edge. Fight Club does that so brilliantly, and I kind of preferred a transgressive approach to doing the anthology. So I think a lot of it, I think it deconstructs a lot of the tropes that you would see in a 1970s movie. Um, I tried to keep the book PG rated. It's 99% PG rated, uh, because I wanted to capture that Count. Now it's got nothing to do with Count Yorga, but like an AIP, Count Yorga, PG rated horror movie that kind of pushes the envelope a little, and I let all that inspire it. And I think that I can't say it didn't sell a million copies, but the people who read it, they really liked it. I mean, they really liked the approach. They saw it as something different, and it was took a lot of rewriting and revising to get it to where I wanted it to be. But I think it's something I'm very proud of, and I think if people read it, they would like it.
That's awesome. And going back to anthologies, are you a fan of the VHS anthologies or the Scare Package? Did you like those?
I have not seen them yet. I definitely do want to see them. I just haven't had the time to watch them. I haven't had the time to watch Creep Show, which is unfortunate, because the first Creep Shows, I mean, my God, I saw that I don't know how many times. I saw that in the theater when it first came out, and I had the comic book and all that. But I have to catch up on all that. Yeah, I mean, the only
Yeah, those have a nice framework. You might like them.
yeah, the one I did watch, um, and the name is escaping me. It was on Netflix. It was a science fiction one. Love, Death, and Robots. Was that the name of it?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
those are amazing.
Those were fantastic. Those I did watch. Those are great.
I was gonna ask you, the Tragedy Man, are all
Mhm.
those characters, do they end up meeting somewhere, or how do they end up intertwining like their lives, or are they just separate events that happen in the same location? Or I don't want to spoil it too much for our viewers, but is
That
there
that's that is
You can't say, huh?
I'll say there's 5 stories, and the answer to that is story 5.
Mm.
Story 5 will
Kind of
kind
answer all those.
kind of does this to the traditional anthology where nothing's ever linked together. Story 5 kind of, that's why I have a disclaimer at the beginning of the book. I said, I don't have it. There's no table of contents to this. You got to read it in order. And when you read it in order, you find out that things are a bit more, are not as disparate as you were led to believe, that there is a connection between them, and that all slowly reveals itself in the 5th
Ooh.
story. Uh, the the thing with Tragedy Man is the first 2 stories are short stories. The second 2 are novelettes, and the 5th is a novella. So you start out with 2 short stories, 2 almost novellas, and then you end up with a novella. So the novella allows some of these, because it's lengthy. It allows the story to tie things together a bit more. And yeah, but I can't give too much away because then it would blow up the everything
Yeah, of
you're
course.
gonna read. Yeah.
Of course. I was gonna say the best thing about it for like a rookie reader like myself
Hmm.
is you get the short stories first to kind of warm you up to like
Yeah.
reading the longer ones. It's like, yay, you read the baby one, and then a
Yeah.
slightly larger one, and then a slightly larger one, and then you get the
Yeah.
big boy.
Yeah. 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 Yep. Yeah. Yeah. That was. See, I used to work in film development. When I say that, they think you're developing film like in a lab. It's like, no, it deals with developing the story and the screenplay. And although prose is totally different from a screenplay, but there's overlapping things. Um, as a new author, like, people don't know me, they don't know my style. I don't have 10 books out there that where I'm catering to somebody who's already been with me for 10 years. Um, I didn't want to, you kind of have to lead them into it. And because Tragedy Man's a little bit different in terms of its structure and tone, you kind of have to like a good anthology. The very first story establishes the tone. It establishes, well, you'll have your intro, your framework, and then you'll have a story that kind of is a warm-up story. Like, all the really good anthology films have a short, direct, to the point beginning that hooks you. And some of the crazier editorial decisions, like some of these guys make, they'll put out a short story collection, and the first story is 45 pages, and it's like, oh no, I think you'd probably want to start out with something 8 pages or so, like that, just to give people an idea what this is about. Because one of the things you got to remember, it's very easy to just toss a short story or an anthology collection over your shoulder. You might stick with a novel to halfway and say, you know what, I give up, I don't like this. But if you give them one bad short story at the beginning, you're going to lose your audience. So you kind of have to lead them into it. And yeah. So yeah, that was basically it. Yeah, it starts out slower and then it builds. And story 2 is really where things start to shift, where it's you start realizing that this is just not a short story collection, that this isn't one, that you couldn't just switch the stories around out of order, or just pick one up and put it in another book, and say, yeah, you know what, I don't want to do 5 stories. I'm going to pull 2 of these out. I'm going to write another story. I'm going to release 2 trilogies in 2 years, and in 1 year, and I'll say I got 2 books out. No, you can't do that. Do it with these stories. So story 1 kind of sets you up for the tone. Story 2 is where you start drifting towards the more transgressive elements. So it's kind of a build, as opposed to just coming out of the box with something. You know. Um, I think that I think with short stories or anthologies, you still have to build them like a novel. You shouldn't just throw them out there scattershot. I don't. That's not a good. It's not a good reading experience.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. And there is something that I want to mention for our lovely viewers today. You are also a active writer with horrornews.net. So I
Yep.
wanted to kind of showcase a little bit of that and kind of see what they can find. So let's go ahead and go into this. So if you guys go to um, horrornews.net and you type in let's see, on here you can type in, your lovely name, if I can spell it right. And then once you do that, then it's going to search for all the results, and then you'll find all of the stuff you've written for them. I know you've done like the faces, voices. You've done some pretty cool stuff. Here's the Universal Monsters and Neurotics article that you wrote.
Oh, that's a book.
Oh, that's a book. Yes, that's awesome.
Mhm.
And then it looks like also you worked with our buddy Sean Donahue writing the. Did you write this the trauma article?
Nope.
Nope. Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. All right. Well, that's awesome. There's a lot of if just by typing your name on the search bar, I was able to find a lot of really good stuff here that you've worked on.
Yep.
So.
If you go to any one of my articles and where it says author and you click on my name, it'll take you to my author page. So if you go
Ah.
to like the Salem Lot essay, which is my most recent one, and then you click on that and you click on my name, you'll have the that's where the author page will turn up.
Okay. Let me show that one so they can see a little bit of what's going on. Sorry, I'm a rookie on this website, so definitely we're all learning together, guys. So if you go, for example, here
There you
this is
go.
the article you're talking about.
Yep. You just click on
Um
my name.
yeah, we just click on this and
There you go.
then here's
Now you
all
got them
the.
all.
Oh man, you know what I'm going to do?
Yeah.
I'm gonna bookmark that. It didn't show, but I bookmarked it.
Those are not movie reviews. I want to tell everybody that right from the beginning. They're not. It's not me writing about I like this, I didn't like that. Those are some of them are off the wall, way off the wall. Um, they're basically thematic looks at some classic horror movies from different genres, different eras. Like I think I have, you got Black Christmas, you got Fade to Black,
Mhm.
there's White Zombie, Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue. That was the first one I did for them. Theater of Blood, one of my favorite movies. Um, yeah, Theater of Blood. Theater of Blood, it's Vincent Price movie, and it talks about the relationship between the main character, the Lionheart, the psychopathic Shakespearean actor, and his daughter. And Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue actually talks about, even though it's a movie with cannibal zombies, the essay focuses on generational gaps and problems between the very much older conservative police chief and the very young bearded hippie protagonist, how they can't communicate, and because they can't communicate, nobody's taking the zombie infestation seriously, and it just spreads. So a lot of those stories or those essays are along those lines. Well, that's probably the most crackpot one. I
Mm.
think the one you got the cursor on, the Graduate.
Oh.
Yeah, what happened was one of my all-time favorite movies in the UHF days was Death Dream, which is Bob Clark did Porky's. Um, Death Dream is like a weirdo vampire movie where this young man comes back from Vietnam and they thought he was dead, but apparently he's alive. Well, it turns out he's basically a walking dead creature who needs blood to survive, or else he's going to decompose. So, of course, the movie that I connected that with was The Graduate, which has nothing to do with vampires. But
Yeah.
I just popped that into my Netflix queue and I was watching it and I said to myself, you know what? There's a lot of thematic things in The Graduate that are similar to Death Dream. And I kind of expanded on that. And that's why I
Mhm.
like writing for horror news. I don't think a lot of venues would publish that stuff. I think
Yeah,
it would be
no.
it'd be too out there. But
But
you know,
I want to congratulate you. It looks like you've started writing with them as early as January 10th of 2020, even earlier, getting
oh
ready
yeah,
to gear up.
yeah,
So that's quite the achievement. How did you get
yeah.
involved with them?
I had attended I had first seen Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue in high school, and it didn't grab me. And I got many years later, I got a copy of the box set, and I watched it, and it still didn't grab me. And then it was playing at the Egyptian Theater because Synapse was releasing yet another box set, and I went to go see the movie, and I watched it, and right before the movie, somebody said, they introduce it. Usually at the revival houses, an MC will introduce the movie, and he said, brace yourself because this is one of the greatest zombie movies ever made. So, and I'm like, well, okay, whatever. And I watched it third time. Again, I'm much older, and I'm in a theater. I'm not watching on VHS or DVD. And I sat there, and as an adult, as opposed to a younger person looking more for Dawn of the Dead type action, it just blew me away, man. I mean, it is absolutely one of the greatest. It's like some movies you don't get it the first time. I didn't get the Wild Bunch the first time I watched it. I didn't get the French Connection the first time I watched it. But subsequent viewings, I was like, okay, wow, this stuff is really good. And I I had written similar essays like that for magazines and fanzines in the past, and I had been away from it for about 10 years. Not that I stopped writing because I write professionally, but I write marketing and promotional and publicity related materials. And I wanted to say, you know what, I want to do an old school essay like I used to do 10 years ago. And I wrote, I guess I was inspired by Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue. And I think that inspiration really came out. And they really dug it, man. And they kind of give me carte blanche to write what I want, which is rare, because you you take editorial control away from a writer, you'll get some lousy articles. But yeah, and I have a new one that I want to write for them, which I'm not going to discuss right now because then 20 other people will write one on the same topic. Uh, so yeah, but I'm consistent with them. Like, but the two that I contribute to mostly would be horrornews.net and comic book historians. And I'm hoping 2024, because I've been bogged down, not bogged down. I wouldn't use that description, but because I've been very busy with self, with personal projects, larger projects, such as another nonfiction book and another sci-fi book, as well as editing Tragedy Man and releasing it and promoting it. I haven't had that much time to do online magazine writing, but I did do one on Green Arrow for comic book historians recently, and I think the Salem's Lot one was maybe a couple months ago for horror news. But yeah, but I'm pretty consistent with them. Terror Vision was the other one. Terror Vision's a terrible movie, um, or maybe not. I don't know. I watch it again. Yeah, it's bad in a lot of ways, but I forgive it, just like I forgave it in 1987 when I first saw it. But Terror Vision's basically a crackpot sci-fi horror comedy that's not funny. But if you watch it through the lens of the 80s, it's very 80s. It's so 1980s culture, and that's kind of what I wrote about. I'm like, this is so 80s. It's so 80s culturally. It deserves a second look.
I love TerraVision.
Yeah.
It's just super cheese, but fun.
I love it. It's a great movie. Well, it's not a great movie. But it's a great experience to watch. I wouldn't call it a great
Yes,
movie.
yes,
Does
Yeah.
have a great soundtrack. I will say that. Has a
yes,
great
it does.
soundtrack, great theme.
Yeah. Yeah.
Living
And
Dead at the Manchester Morgue has a phenomenal soundtrack. It's one of the very best for a horror movie. I will say that.
yeah, I think the 80s set a really high bar for just the best, horror movies, and now I don't feel like there's been a lot of movies that made such a big impact on horror. I mean, there's been some here and there, but to keep something so, consistent and still prevalent. I mean, there's some 80s movies that you can say, "Oh, have you seen this?" And I'll be like, who knows? It's probably a chick flick that hasn't been mentioned in 30 years, you know?
Yeah, I would say from in the 80s, the first half, uh, 80 to 85. Whoa, you got a lot of great movies. Um, 86 to 1990. Oh boy, you're very inconsistent. I mean, yeah, a few gems here and there, but a lot of junk. And horror was, I don't, older folks like myself will tell you that Fangoria had Batman Returns on the cover because there was no horror product coming out. And I remember arachnophobia, they referred to it as in the marketing material as a chilomedy because they didn't want to use the word horror because horror meant death at the box office. But there were some good movies like Bad Dreams that didn't do well. Shocker, which was a goofy Nightmare on Elm Street kind of riff, which it was fun. It was cool. Um, but a lot, what happened was a lot of the grindhouse stuff got dumped onto the independently owned video stores. So with the drive-ins closing, the independent movie theaters closing, and the major theaters only wanting to carry studio films, you couldn't really get a horror movie. It was hard for an independent horror. A lot of really good independent horror movies came out, but none of them made enough money so that you could make more of them, at least for a 5 or 6 year period. Whereas with action movies, that was not the case. One of the dumbest movies, and I love Charles Bronson, but Death Wish 4 is stupid. And Death Wish 4, the VHS sales in the U.S. were $5 million. You know, um, that's a lot of money, and they would pre-sell these movies, so they knew that they were going to get X amount of money from video, X amount of money from cable. They would get X amount of money selling the rights to the UK. So you would get these canon films, which were these mid-budget movies, and then you'd have the studio movies like Cobra, Rambo 3, and all that, and they're all making money. Terminator 2 is making money. And then you would get a ton of action movies that were very low budget, like Siege at Firebase Gloria or POW The Escape. So the mid to late 80s, I think, was the era of the action movie. And
Yeah.
horror was kind of just, yeah. You know, the glory day horror. See, horror had its ups and downs. It's like it mostly up. It had that run from the silent era to the British horror ban, which was artificial. They just couldn't get distribution in the UK, so that hard. And then when they lifted the ban, you had that glory era for the early 40s, and then everything went to sci-fi. And then 1957, you had horror Dracula. I Was a Teenage Werewolf. You had the Shock Theater packages, TV, and that just led to a horror boom that was just red hot from like 1957, I'd say, to about 83. And then you could see the cool down 84, 85, 86, 87. And then like late 90s, it started taking off again. And it hasn't cooled since I said Saw. When did they make the first Saw movie? 2003, 2004. And I can't think of any lull period between 2004 and today. So it's every week something with horror on it's making money. So it's generally been up, but the 80s was kind of painful. But it was painful because it had no distribution, and the VHS market was too glutted, and that didn't affect action because action movies from the 70s were not like action movies in the 80s. Like the action movies in the 70s were depressing. They had downbeat endings. They were miserable almost. Like if you watch like Bronson and the Mechanic, that's a dark action movie. But you watch him in Death Wish 3, it's over the top. It's silly. He's running around with a machine gun that's supposed to be mounted on a friggin' airplane. You can't shoot that thing holding it in your arm. First of all, your arm would melt. That thing would heat up so fast.
And don't forget the amazing one-liners.
Oh God, yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
it's funny that you mentioned Batman Returns being on the cover of Fangoria. I would think something like Batman Forever would be pretty horrific to be on the cover.
Yeah, it was also it was like it's like the thing with it, it's not like there weren't going to be any magazines without Batman on the cover, and it's as soon as somebody sees Fangoria, and if they're not a horror fan, they're not going to buy that. So you know, but they're not going to put an independent film on there because nobody knows what it is, so nobody's going to buy it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, if you really want to see, just look at the old back issues, man. Fangoria was grotesque when it first came
Mm-hmm.
out, and then it
Mm-hmm.
kind of toned itself down towards the towards the 80s and the
I'm more
90s.
of a Rue Morgue fan. I really I've have
I like Rue
subscribed to
Morgue.
them
I
for
actually
years.
I actually wrote for Rue Morgue under a different name. Yeah,
Nice.
long time ago.
Ah,
I think I did 3 or 4 articles for them. Oof, that had to be 20 years ago. I don't think it's the same people today who own it. So they probably would, if you asked them about me, they probably would say I never heard of them. But I did do a
Aw.
little bit. Yeah, that was yeah, yeah.
Well, you can
Oh,
add
oh,
that to your list of resume
yeah.
and things accomplished, and
20 years fly by. Yeah, wow.
yeah,
Whew.
a month flies by, let alone
Yeah.
20 years. I'm sitting here thinking, it's still, the day after Halloween. I'm still stuck in Halloween land, and it's like,
I'm
no.
still I'm still trying to catch up on DVDs I bought to watch before Halloween ended. Like I got my Halloween 3 season of The Witch.
Thank
Got my
you. A
got my
huge shout out, Anthony. That is my favorite movie of all time. So, and
Oh wow.
I see that you
Wow.
posted an article about Halloween 3. So I'm gonna
Yes.
read that
Yes,
after
I
we're done
did.
here.
Um, I might revisit that one because that was one of the articles I thought I could have done a little better with.
Okay.
But that was another like it ain't a review. It's a different
Yeah.
take on Halloween 3. It
Yeah.
focuses on the character and some of
Uh,
his motivations. But yeah,
oh yeah, you can
yeah.
dissect a lot of those characters, and there's a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of Celtic folklore in it. People don't
Mhm.
realize, like, people just think, oh, it's silly mass and tricks and saints
Oh,
and stuff. I'm
there,
like, no, there's a
there's a
deep Celtic meaning behind all of the movie, and yeah, you just gotta know, man.
that actually just played theatrically here in LA a couple
Ooh.
weeks ago. Yeah. Yeah, well, they got a lot of revival houses here. That's one of the joys of living in Hollywood
Mm.
is you have access to revival theaters. And I saw last night. I saw Messiah of Evil, which is a forgotten movie from 73, 74, and it was packed. It was like 225 seat theater. I think if they had 5 seats that weren't sold, that would be a lot because that theater was packed. And the audience was just sitting there. Usually, when you watch a revival movie from the 70s, you get a lot of snickering because a lot of these movies, B movies, can be silly in spots. But I mean, the audience was just like watching this movie like this, like enthralled because it was so creepy. It was a really good
Yeah.
movie. nice to see it get. It's coming out on Blu-ray this month, so that's
Ooh,
probably why it's getting booked in
it's getting
theaters.
pushed. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm from LA, so I definitely miss that a lot. I miss all the pop-up events, all of that. So I don't know. Maybe I can move back.
They no, it's too expensive.
Yeah,
Way too
true.
expensive. I don't think I'm going to be here much longer because
Oh, really?
yeah, I think it's time. Well, I've been back and forth that way. I've been here a while, moved out, come back, move out, come back, move out, come back.
That happened to me too.
Yeah, LA's good
Been there.
for a stretch, and then you go, you accomplish what you have to accomplish, and
Then you
then it's
go.
time to get out of there because that rent is expensive. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, Anthony and Kat, do you guys have any last final things that you want to mention or ask or anything you want to say before we wrap up?
If you go to TikTok at Tony M Caro horror, you get some of my musings on TikTok. I try to do a couple short videos a week, and I got uh, a YouTube channel. I believe oh my gosh, I think it's Anthony M Caro writer. So at Anthony M Caro might be the address. I don't even remember the address. I don't do that YouTube channel that much, but a lot of what's on there is the same stuff that's on TikTok. And I got my Twitter at Tony M Caro, and you can follow follow things that I do on there. Like if I have a new essay or a new article, they certainly go up on Twitter or X as they want to call it now. And just check me out on horror news and check me out on Amazon. If you go Tragedy Man and you click on my name, you'll get my other two books. And in February, March, I'll have I have a new release coming out. I'll probably do a short story collection that's a little more traditional. And I'm wrapping that up right now, and I'll probably start editing it in January, and February, March, it should be out.
Awesome.
But
Anthony,
right now,
I was gonna say we welcome you to come back on the show once you release this, and we can deep dive just on that.
Oh yeah, that'd
Come
be
back
cool.
on the show, and then we can just specifically talk about this special book that you're releasing. Can't wait to read it.
Yeah, I'm hoping to do 3 books next year. I mean, they're already at various stages of being completed. So I'm hoping 1 horror, 1 sci-fi, 1 nonfiction film criticism book. So I will definitely be busy and possibly do some podcasting fiction. So we'll like audiobook style podcasting. So going to be a busy 2024. That's for sure.
Do you have any fantasy works in the any fantasy that you're gonna be working on or releasing soon? Horror fantasy?
The answer to that is I've been trying to fit a fantasy thingy into my schedule for the past year, and I'm trying to. I just want to grab something for you.
Yes, please. All the fantasy. Grab all the fantasy stuff you got for me.
Wait, there you go. Do you remember this, Richard Blade?
Ooh, that's so cool.
Did you ever hear the Richard Blade books?
I've seen them, but I've never actually read them. But the cover, yeah, I remember the cover.
They lasted from first book was 1969. I think they lasted till 84. Very kooky premise because Pinnacle Books. In those days, you would sit down and you would come up with an idea for a book series because in those days people bought a lot of series. And somebody said, James Bond is selling big, and these Conan the Barbarian books are selling really big. So why don't we get a character like James Bond and we'll throw him into this interdimension thingy, and he'll be Conan when he lands on these strange worlds, and he's got a sword. it's a little kooky, it's a little out there, but it's fun, like adult fantasy from the 70s. And that's the kind of fantasy stuff I liked. I like the 70s pulp style stuff. And what I wanted to do was oh geez, on horror news I did a Sword and a Sorcerer. I did a essay on that. So yeah, I
Ooh,
do like fantasy, but so I really wanted to do a fantasy work, but
you should.
yeah,
I encourage it.
I want to do it. I will do it. I want to do a hard boiled crime book. There's a lot, but what I don't want to do is I don't want to just rush things out, because
Yeah.
I'm not as great as fun as these books are. They're plot driven, which is it's Richard Blade's not a deep character by any stretch of the imagination, um, and the books are kind of yeah, you get a few twists and turns here and there, but they're action driven. And I'm not really a plot driven writer. I kind of like the characters, and those books take a little longer to write, because you're not writing car chases. You're not writing the bombs ticking 10 nines. How do I oh geez, yeah, cool, I disarmed it. They're not those kind of books, so can't really rush them. So you kind of got to develop them a little more, and that's kind of why I try not to jump too much into new projects, because I jump into a new project and the ones I'm currently working on kind of get their releases get pushed back, and then I got 5 unfinished books. Well, that doesn't help me. So but once I get through this year, yeah, definitely gonna be looking at doing a fantasy book. Yeah,
Yay!
yeah.
I'm excited.
And cyberpunk. The sci-fi book will be a cyberpunk book. Yeah.
Awesome. And I had a question for actually both of you. I'm a big fan of film criticism books, so I'm excited to check out your Universal Monsters and Neurotics Children of the Night and their hangups. So I have a question in relation to Universal Monsters. Which
Hmm.
would, if you could be any Universal monster, which would you be and why?
Whew. Well, I would have to say Karloff's the Mummy, because he's probably the most manageable. It wouldn't really affect my life. So, if I were the Wolfman, I'd have a lot of problems. Wolfman's my favorite of the Universal monsters, but oh God, that's anxiety. So if I could have a choice, I'd be Karloff's Mummy, because he's so low maintenance. I mean, my God, I certainly wouldn't want to be invisible. You know, and Dracula's cool, but I mean, who the hell wants to stay up all night every night? You know. So yeah, yeah. So Karloff's the Mummy might. Well, definitely wouldn't want to be a creature from the Black Lagoon. That would be like being my house cat. Um, Yeah, I think the Mummy's low maintenance enough. If the Mummy wasn't so not the Cheney Jr. Mummy. I love those movies; those are fun. But the Karloff Mummy, I mean, if he wasn't so hung up about bringing his girlfriend back from the dead, and just be happy that they resurrected him, I mean, the dude could have just got a job and just lived a normal life. Just don't tell anybody you're 3,000 years old. But but the dude had to go get himself in trouble, and he did. So yeah.
Nice. How about you, Luna? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I have an answer for you. I just didn't want to hear you guys my typing away. And I have a little thing to show you. Fred, yes, Frankenstein.
Oh yeah.
My boy Frankenstein. He's so misunderstood. He didn't intentionally want to hurt people. There is a child playing by the lake, right? And
Yeah.
he's like, oh, friend, he's all careful and gentle with the child. The child doesn't want to hurt him. She's just, I think I would be Frankenstein because I don't intentionally want to hurt people. If they fuck with me and I end up fucking them up, then that's their problem, not my problem. You know what I mean? But I'm very gentle around pets and children, and I just want friends. So I
Yeah,
think Frankenstein would be cool because
Nice.
of that.
that's my favorite essay in that book collection I did. Um, it's called Frankenstein: The Abused and Neglected Child, and it basically puts 100% of the blame for, well, not 100% of the blame, but a lot of the blame for the monster's rampages go right back to Henry Frankenstein and Fritz, because they're the ones who really screwed that up. You know what I'm saying? They brought this character back to life with a wiped brain. It's an adult with a wiped mind, which means it's got a newborn's mind. It just learns quicker because it's an adult. It's an adult brain. It's a fully developed brain, and they didn't do jack to socialize this
Or
monster.
prepare him.
No,
Nothing.
they,
Just
they were
let him
mean to him.
fucking out. Whatever.
Yeah, they were mean to him. They
Oh,
neglected him.
extremely mean to him.
I mean, Fritz outright physically abused him,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of caused a lot of the problems with the monster. Could have been avoided, I think. And they said, well, it's a criminal brain. Oh, baloney. Baloney. The brain's wiped. He can't speak, he can't do anything. I mean, man, maybe he has some latent issues, but I think the criminal brain thing is a cop out or
True.
or an attempt to deflect the issues that neglectful parenting, and that's really Dr. Frankenstein was a parent to that monster, and Fritz was a sibling, and they were true. And what's the other doctor? I can't remember his name. He was I'd say it would be more like an uncle, and he just wants to dissect it. I mean, this poor creature really didn't have a chance. He had a lousy family life. So
Yeah, for sure. What about you, Kat?
So Anthony, what is the best place for us to buy your work? The best outlet where you get more of the profits versus the retailer?
oh, it's exclusive to Amazon. Yeah, I did it
Okay,
exclusive to Amazon. So yeah, you can get them all on
awesome.
Amazon. Universal Monsters, I put that on sale for Halloween for 99 cents because that book is two and a
Nice.
half 2 years old. All the books are reasonably priced. So if you want to, you can check them out there. Yeah, I mean, it's I at this stage of the game, I'm not looking for a lot of money because if I was, I wouldn't get it. So what's the point? But it's more or less putting the stuff out there and building an audience and getting your name out there and putting out quality work. It helps with that cause and promoting it. So yeah, right now I only got 3 titles, but I think I'm proud of all of them. The sci-fi book's really a little wacky, that's going to get there's a spin-off to that I'm writing, and I'd like to put that into an anthology. Um, I hope to do it by the end of next year. So yeah, but yeah, Amazon's where you can find my stuff.
Nice.
Hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Anthony. If you want
Oh,
to
thank you.
If you want to stay after our outro, that would be lovely.
Mhm.
For all of our viewers that are watching, I'm seeing you, sneaky ninjas in the back. You have been participating in silently watching, but I've been
Mm.
watching you, and you guys have been there the whole time. So,
Yeah.
mad love to you guys. We love you guys, and we will see you tomorrow for a fun episode of Cool Time. See you guys tomorrow. Have a wonderful night. And yeah. Bye.